Hi, I'm Sarah Ashton, president of Ashton, Metzler and Associates. I'm here with my colleague Jim Metzler today to talk about performing an assessment prior to deploying Voice over IP. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Sarah. It's great to be here today.
Jim, why should an IT organization perform an assessment prior to deploying Voice over IP?
Sarah, really a number of reasons. Perhaps one of the strongest reasons is voice is such a highly visible application. Everybody uses it. Everybody is upset if the quality isn't there. And in particular, having poor quality voice can negatively impact sales and customer service. So it's a very, very important application. And at the same time, though, it's also very demanding for having low levels of network delay, jitter, and packet loss. What that means is if you have even moderate levels of delay, jitter, packet loss, voice quality is poor, everybody is impacted, again, sales and customer service as examples. Let me just explain that a bit more. If you contrast voice with, say, email, and Sarah, if I send you an email, if the second packet gets there a half second after the first, you don't notice, you don't care. In voice, it can make a difference. In a traditional email or file transfer, if packets are lost, they get retransmitted. In voice, you don't even try to do that because the packets would get there so late. Not that there'd be a waste, it would cause poor quality, voice quality. And it's not just voice we're talking about, it's also traditional video conferencing and emerging deployments of telepresence that really are the exact same kind of thing.
Okay, so what goes into an assessment of Voice over IP readiness?
A whole variety of things, Sarah. One, of course, is to understand is there enough bandwidth to support Voice over IP. I'll give you an example. Let's say you have an office that has 50 employees. Well, in today's environment, you certainly would not have 50 voice grade lines going into that office. You use a formula like Erlang B or Erlang C and determine how many lines you needed to have a really good chance of having a call go through. Let's say, for the sake of example, it's 10 lines. Let's also say that the IT organization has determined that they'll use an encoding scheme that requires 64 kilobits per second for a voice call. Well, then you need 640 kilobits per second of bandwidth out of that office to support voice. So that's the starting point, or a starting point. But you also need to determine end-to-end if you have acceptable levels of delay, jitter, and packet loss. And the metrics or the goals are a little bit subjective, but a lot of people talk about 150 milliseconds or less of delay. You can go past that a bit, but you don't want to go too much past that. Packet loss is more complex because if you think about having, say, 1% packet loss, if that's dropping a packet and carrying 99, that's goodness. But if it's dropping 100 and carrying 10,000, that voice call is not going to sound good. And I think the biggest challenge around jitter is just defining what we mean by it. I tend to use RFC 1889, and based on that definition, we're looking at maybe 15 or 20 milliseconds, of jitter being acceptable. So, identified you have enough bandwidth. On the end-to-end path, are there acceptable levels of delay, jitter, and packet loss? But you'll find places where they're not. So a very key component is to identify, okay, if on a given path there's, say, too much packet loss, what's the source of that packet loss? So those are the kinds of things we should be thinking about.
Okay. So how do you recommend that an IT organization proceed relative to conducting this type of Voice over IP readiness assessment?
Well, certainly it's the kind of task you can outsource to a third party. And historically, a lot of IT organizations have done that. I think because until recently, there really were not some effective tools to do it yourself. Now I'm seeing a lot of interest in tools, notably from Apparent Networks and their tool, PathView. And PathView is so very exciting because it can give IT shops that kind of end-to-end view I mentioned.
Right.
So it can do the end-to-end bandwidth is available, how much delay, jitter, and packet loss. But more important, Sarah, it's so difficult to, on an end-to-end path, identify on a hop-by-hop basis through the public cloud, through an AT&T or Verizon or some other vendor, on a hop-by-hop basis without instrumentation, how much delay, jitter, and packet loss is there. And this tool can do that, so that's very exciting. But I've also talked to some people that have used the tool and say, yeah, Jim, that's absolutely critical. But they like the tool for other reasons also. It's easy to use, has good reporting. And one person said to me, Jim, my other tools use SNMP, Simple Network Management Protocol, and they're okay. But if SNMP is not turned on and it's off and not, they don't even work. PathView, on the other hand, does not require SNMP, it just works.
That sounds powerful. Do you have any last thoughts for this topic, Jim?
In my mind, doing a pre-assessment of voice over IP is no longer an option. It must be done. There's no question in my mind. Highly visible application, you don't want to deploy it and have it not work well. And again, on an ongoing basis, I see more IT organizations on a do-it-yourself basis using a tool like Apparent Networks, PathView, so they can do that kind of pre-assessment themselves, and then hopefully use PathView once they've deployed voice over IP for ongoing troubleshooting and management. But Sarah, I suggest we discuss troubleshooting and management in a separate video.
Jim, thanks so much for sharing your thoughts today, and thanks to all of you for watching this video. We certainly will continue this discussion of how PathViews helps IT organizations troubleshoot and monitor networks in a separate YouTube video.
Thanks, Sarah.